Well, once again, good evening, and thank you all so much for being here tonight. My name is Maya Middleton. I'm a third-year student here at Mercer Law, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to a very special celebration in the life of the law school. This is the 100th anniversary of the graduation of our first woman graduate from Mercer Law in 1919. This anniversary also coincides with the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, giving women the right to vote in this country. So for both of these reasons, tonight we celebrate just how far women have come over this past century. We have a great panel of trailblazing women here to my left to discuss their journeys to and from Mercer Law School, and we'll give you more on that in a moment. And we're also pleased to be the first site in Georgia to host an exhibit on the passage of the 19th Amendment by the American Bar Association. I hope you've had an opportunity to view the exhibit in the lobby here tonight, but if you haven't, we ask that when we adjourn, you just take a few minutes on your way out to take a look at that exhibit as you exit the theater. If you don't know, Georgia played a dubious role in the passage of the 19th Amendment, whether you know it or not. Our state was the first in the nation to reject ratification of the 19th Amendment, barely a month after Congress initially adopted it in the summer of 1919. That's right, our legislators didn't waste a moment making a statement that women in this state didn't need to bother their pretty little heads with complicated tasks like voting. It was a different era for certain, one in which women, racial minorities, well, essentially anyone other than men in power, had to fight for the most basic of American rights and freedoms. Although we don't know a great deal about Mercer Law's first woman graduate, Katherine Jackson, we have to guess that she was quite the pioneer to even dream of becoming a lawyer, much less applying to and enrolling in our law school in the early 1900s. This first woman to graduate from any law school in Georgia graduated from the now defunct Atlanta Law School in 1911. But she could not be admitted to the bar because the State Bar of Georgia ruled that only men could be admitted to the bar. Seriously, it was a bar rule that only men could be admitted to the bar, and they refused to change it. For 5 years, this woman lobbied the Georgia legislature until they passed a law in 1916 saying that any person who passed the bar exam could be admitted to the bar. So the legislature had to override the state bar for women to even begin practicing in this state. Although Katherine Jackson opened the door for many women at Mercer, between 1919 and 1960, there were only 9 women who graduated from Mercer Law School. I hope you had a chance to look at the poster boards in our reception area tonight that gave you a glimpse into the lives of these first women graduates. It's clear that they continued the fight for women's rights at the bar and in society as they went forth into the working world. We thank the members of our Mercer Law Association of Women Law Students for their hard work and research on these first women graduates. Our reception and our program tonight are co-sponsored by Mercer Law School and our ALS chapter. We are especially thankful for our sponsors, the Middle Georgia chapter of the Georgia Association of Women Lawyers and the Macon Law Firm of Childers and McCain. Thank you all for helping us present this program tonight. With that, I'd like to introduce our dean, Kathy Cox, who has also been a pioneer as a women lawyer, serving as Georgia's first female Secretary of State before entering the world of academia. Dean Cox will introduce our special panelists as they now enter the stage. So let's all give a warm Mercer Law welcome for our panelists and Dean Cox.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya, and good evening to all of you. It really is a very special evening tonight for Mercer Law School to celebrate this important milestone in its history this year. It is a proud, sorry if we can get the sound right here, a little too loud, a proud moment for our university to reflect on its willingness to admit and educate women in the law in the early 1900s when most law schools were not doing so. As Maya mentioned, the first woman to graduate from any law school in Georgia came from the Atlanta Law School, which no longer exists, But we here at Mercer graduated a woman before either the University of Georgia or Emory law schools. Just want to make that note. Yeah, I think that deserves applause. But you know, to give you some context, women were not even admitted to Harvard Law School until 1950. So they didn't even graduate until 1953. So we were decades ahead of some of, those Ivy Leagues. But even though our first woman graduated in 1919, very few women followed her for the next several decades. It wasn't until after the 1960s that Mercer Law began to see more than one woman in a class, and even then, only every few years. By the mid-1970s, we began to gain some strength in numbers, and some of those alumni are here tonight. So I'd like to ask if you were one of our trailblazing women who are here tonight from the classes of the 50s, 60s, or 70s, would you stand or wave your hand and let us recognize you? Thank you, thank you, thank you. I especially want to point out that we have a number of family members here tonight of the late Pat O'Neill, who graduated in 1951. So would the O'Neill family members also stand or wave your hands and let us recognize you as well in the back corner? Thank you. Pat was a big part of the life of Mercer Law for a long time. We also have a nice contingent here of alumni from the 1980s when women really began to come into their own and grew to upwards of a third of our entering classes. So would all of those alumni from the 1980s, of which I am one, please stand and let us also recognize our 1980s alumnus. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm very pleased to tell you that today, women regularly represent 50% or more of our entering classes at Mercer Law School. So that's definitely worthy of applause. This year's class was a little bit of an aberration. This year's entering class was made up of 44% women, but over the past 2 years, our entering classes had 54 and 57% consecutively women. So let's just say women are taking over, Judge Adams. Is that what you said to me earlier? We continue to hover right above or below the 50% mark and have for several years, which is a remarkable change, certainly from 100 years ago, but really even from the last 40 to 50 years. So we're going to talk a little bit about that transition tonight with our special group of alumni who are gathered with me on the stage tonight. So let me introduce them briefly. To my left and to your right, we have first the Honorable Mary Alice Buckner, a graduate of the class of 1973. She became Mercer Law School's very first African-American woman graduate. Judge Buckner returned to her native Columbus, Georgia after graduation and went into private practice, which she continues today. She was appointed as the first woman on the Muskogee County Recorder's Court in 1984 and became the full-time judge in 1991. She has just retired from that judgeship earlier this year after 24 years as the Recorder's Court judge. Welcome, Judge Buckner. Next, we have the Honorable Wendy Shube from the class of 1977, and she has always been in the courtrooms of this state, starting her career as a trial attorney with the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, moving into prosecution with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, and then serving a 24-year stint on the Fulton County State and Superior Court benches, where she helped to create the Business Court and the Family Court Division. She recently retired from the bench to become a full-time mediator with JAMS in Atlanta. Welcome to you, Judge Shube. Next, we have Ms. Yvette Simmons, a graduate of the class of 1982. She has, throughout her career as an estate, guardianship, and elder law attorney, combined service to her community and service to the bar with an active law practice. She is today a partner in her firm of Simmons, Finney, Solomon, and Winfield in Port St. Lucie, Florida. She has held numerous positions in leadership with the Florida Bar and the American Bar Association, including serving in the ABA House of Delegates. She is a past president of the National Bar Association, the nation's oldest and largest national network of predominantly African American attorneys and judges. She started and has worked for more than 15 years with the Yvette Simmons mock trial competition for high school students in Washington, D.C. We're glad to have you back with us, Ms. Simmons. To my right and your left, we have Professor Leah Chanin, who is a graduate of the class of 1954. She became a professor and director of Mercer's Law Library after several years of private practice and served our law school for 28 years, including a stint as Dean Pro Tem, retiring as Professor Emerita. She now resides in the Washington, D.C. area and keeps in close tabs with us, and we're always glad to have you back with us, Ms. Chanin. Welcome back. Next, we have the Honorable Yvette Miller, who is a member of the class of 1980 and a native of Macon. Judge Miller had a variety of practice experiences in the Fulton County DA's office. She represented MARTA as senior in-house counsel. She became the first African-American woman to practice law in the Brunswick, Georgia Judicial Circuit and served as a director and judge of the Appellate Division of the State Board of Workers' Compensation. In 1996, she was appointed to the State Court of Fulton County and became the first African-American woman later appointed to the Georgia Court of Appeals, where she has served as chief judge and today serves as presiding judge. Judge Miller is also a trustee of Mercer University and earlier this year endowed a scholarship at the law school to promote diversity and inclusion in the legal profession. Judge Miller, thank you very much. And last but certainly not least is Ann Baird Bishop, a graduate of the class of 1976. She has become one of Georgia's most distinguished workers' compensation lawyers. She helped found the firm of Drew, Eckel, and Farnham and became its first female partner, later formed her own firm, and now is of counsel with Hall Booth Smith. She has chaired the law school's Board of Visitors for past 2 years and always gives back to the law school when we call on her. Welcome back, Ann Bishop. So we have a great panel of distinguished, experienced, wonderful women lawyers who have had great careers. And so I want to take them back in time and ask them to share some of their recollections, noting that they all entered law school at a time when not many women had gone before them. So I'd like to ask each of them to tell us a little bit about what motivated them to go into the law, whether they had any role models, and whether they felt like they were being trailblazers at the time. Ann, why don't you start with us?
Can you all hear me without the mic?
Let's pass the mics down. We're going to have to do a little mic passing around.
Okay.
It should be, the green light is on, it should be working.
Okay. I don't suppose really that my reason for going to law school, it was the longest graduate school I could go to without organic chemistry. And I had skipped organic because I was afraid that it would interfere with the things I was really enjoying in college. So I went to law school because I did want to, my father always said, get a trade. And so, I mean, nursing school was out, engineering was out, and I was an English major, and lawyers have to speak English in this country. And so, that's why I went. I didn't really think of myself as a trailblazer when I started law school, although later, I mean, when I got to law school, and there was one woman in the third year class, one woman in the second year class, and there were 7 of us, I think, in my class. And I always wanted to go to a boys' school, so that was fine. But yeah, I really loved law school. But I did later realize that, that I and, the others, Judge Buckner, Judge Shube, I mean, there weren't many women practicing, and I really was standing on the shoulders of the women that had gone before. Thank you, Ruth Ginsburg, because I came along at a really perfect time.
Okay, good evening. I guess I'm very much a product of the 60s, but you have to understand I was born and raised in Macon, Georgia, and the 60s in Macon, Georgia came during the 70s or later. And so I was a big, just loved my mother and father, and always sort of paid attention to what was going on with them. And I saw my father, my mother and father had gone to college at Fort Valley State University. And I obviously met some of their friends and heard their stories by sort of sneaking into the kitchen when I'd been told to go to my room. But my daddy's good friend, who was my neighbor who lived up the street, was the first African-American doctor in Macon, Georgia, and he was not able to practice medicine after being an Army medic in the Army and had served his country. He didn't have privileges because he was an African American. And another one of my daddy's good friends was Thomas Jackson. Some of you may know him. He was the first African American lawyer in this city. And they were talking about issues of equality and how to make things right. And so these were the conversations that I would hear growing up. And so when my father said that, we got to do something about it, Tom Jackson brought a lawsuit. My father had a white-collar job, a good job at Warner Robins Air Force Base. But he'd go to work every day and see the colored and the white signs. And this made a profound impact on my dad, and it made a profound impact on me. And I'll just tell you one story. I knew they had this lawsuit. I knew they were getting prepared. And so, he went out to work. He didn't go to work. He went to the court that day. And I couldn't wait to get home to hear what had happened. And he came in, and he told my mother and I, he said, well, we settled the lawsuit. And I thought, well, that's pretty great. But, I thought it was going to be a big trial. And he said, well, really, nobody showed up but the plaintiff and me. He was the lead, but the attorney and me. My dad was the lead plaintiff and his attorney. And they settled it because, as people do at the end, they do what's right and you move on and things change. And I saw that, and I asked my dad, I said, well, what about all those other people that were supposed to come? And he said, well, they were afraid if they'd come, they'd lose their jobs. And I said, well, why did you go? Don't you need your job? You got me and Mom. This was before my brother had been born. And he said, well, Yvette, some things are just so important that you have to stand up for. So those are the kinds of experiences that I had that led me to want to go to law school. And I felt it on the inside. I didn't know what it was going to take. Tom Jackson was the only lawyer I'd ever met, but I knew that I had to do it. And my mother would always say, if that's what you want to do, you can do it. And so I believe in equality, I believe in fairness, and I'm just proud to have been a double bear, which certainly helped me do what I do. Thank you.
My earliest recollection of wanting to be a lawyer, I was 12 years old. And I announced that to anybody that would listen. I have no idea why. There were no lawyers in my family, very unusual for a Jewish family, but there weren't. And my parents, unbelievably, because you're talking about the 40s, said, fine, fine. And so I came to Mercer Law School by accident, which another story, another time. And I was the only woman for 3 years in my law school, in our law school. One of the funniest, most difficult problems were there were no ladies' rooms in the law school, in the old Riles Law Building. Finally, the dean took pity on me, and one day when I was like in my second year, he said, if you'd like to use the ladies' room, use the bathroom in my suite, you're welcome to do it. I was going next door to the library next to the old Riles building. I didn't have any real problems in law school. The faculty were all fine. I did have some problems with some of the boys from South Georgia. They had a very difficult time with somebody not only being a woman, but a flaming liberal. I did solve that problem. I was 20 years old. One day, the little boys in that era of the 50s thought it was really cute to go behind a woman and pop her bra. That was really suave and cute. So one of these boys came behind me when I'd been in law school about 3 months and did that to me. It was just a reaction. I didn't mean to do it. I balled up my fist. I turned around and hit him and knocked a tooth out. I never had any problem from those boys after that.
Ms. Buckner?
My story is somewhat like Yvette's, and that is where she said that she's a product of the 60s. I am. I didn't just hear the conversations, I lived it, and I saw it. And most of the time I was here, because I'm a double bear too, here at the undergraduate school. And what I had, now I had really decided to go to law school when I was in high school. It was just something that I wanted to do. And I would tell a lot of people that's what I wanted to do, and a lot of people really thought I was kind of crazy because they knew I didn't know any lawyers, and they didn't know any lawyers, and my parents didn't know any lawyers. But my dad had stressed education. He had told us, we're going to do something. So he encouraged me in what I wanted to do. And what happened is, during the time of when you see all the injustices that's going on and the racial biases, you stand on the outside, and a lot of times your voice can't be heard, or you're dismissed really easily. But once, what I felt was that if I could just get on the inside, and on the inside to me meaning becoming a lawyer where my voice could be heard. And so I wanted to be a lawyer so my voice can be heard and listened to, so that I can be and make a difference to what was going on in our society. And that's what motivated me. In terms of being a trailblazer, I didn't have those kinds of things in my head. I was just living my life like I was doing what I wanted to do, hoping I could make a difference, hoping that I could become somebody and earn a living at the same time. But never did I ever think that I was like a trailblazer, and never did I ever think that I'd be sitting on this stage here being considered a trailblazer, but that's what I did. And I had no role models, because the role models we had were teachers. All my sisters and aunts and things are teachers, and so, but I wanted to be the lawyer, so I was just different.
Well, when I hear these wonderful women speak, I realize that I was the product of white privilege. My father was a lawyer, and I worked one summer as an intern for Senator Sam Nunn right after he was elected, and I was in Washington during Watergate. I realized that I wanted to work on Capitol Hill, that there was no more thrilling place to be, and that if I was going to work there, I had to be a lawyer, because the women who were not lawyers were secretaries. It was lawyers or secretaries. So if I wanted to work on Capitol Hill in a position that wasn't as a secretary, I had to go to law school. So I determined to go, and I was coming to Mercer But at the very last minute, I was graduating from college and realized that I really hated to study. And my boyfriend was a law student. We were at the University of Virginia, and he said, if you hate to study so much, you may want to reconsider this choice because all you do is study in law school. And I said, that's an excellent point. And I'm not going to law school. I'm just going to go to Washington first. And I informed my parents at graduation, and they said, not so fast, Missy. I was 20 years old. I had gotten ahead of myself, and they said, you don't have to go to law school, but you have to go to some school somewhere for a couple of years because you're way too young to go to Washington, D.C. and work on Capitol Hill. So I said, okay, I guess I'm going to law school. Professor Chanin told me earlier tonight that I missed some of her classes and that I thought I was too smart to come to class. That wasn't it. I think I was playing tennis, but she informed me that if I didn't come to class, that I was finished with her class. And I don't think I told you what you said. I said. In any event, I had maybe 10 women in my class, and I started in 1974, but I had come from the University of Virginia that had just started admitting women the year before I got there, so the ratio was about the same, 10 to 1, which, like Ann said, was pretty good. Wasn't the worst thing, but it did nothing for my grades.
Wow, I was just listening and reflecting, and I think I said by every statistic I shouldn't be where I am or have what I have. My parents didn't graduate from high school, and my mother died when I was 10, and my aunt raised me, and she didn't even graduate from high school, but we did the best. I mean, I had a great life in reflection. I was one of those that integrated to schools and in the third grade, and the principal telling me if I come to school late, they're going to send me back where I came from, and the teacher hitting me with the paddle, and the kids laughing, being the only black child in the third, the fourth, fifth. It took a while in South to integrate. And the first time I met a lawyer was when I was in college. But I knew that they were out there, and I knew that I wanted to help people, and I had a strong, deep-seated faith that there was something that I had to do, and I have been blessed because there are women that have come before me, such as here, who have allowed me not to be as tough, not to be as mean, not to be as hard, and still succeed. But coming to Mercer, I was reflecting, well, which was worse, being African American or being a woman? Which has been harder? Sometimes they kind of blend together because there's so many different issues. When I got here, we had I think there were 12 of us in the class, and there were 12 black students, 3 black women, and we are still in contact with each other some 36 years later. But it's just, in reflection, I say it was the best thing I could have done, and being able to work with young people and work with older people and be able to embrace people. And Mercer was a part of that. Was a part of that experience. I do have one comment. There was one comment I still remember when I was a student here, and that was someone that worked in the library told me that, as a black woman lawyer, you really are going to have to leave Macon because you wouldn't be able to make it here. And that stuck in my mind almost 40 years later. But so we have to be careful about those things that we say to students, but at the same time, all of those experiences make us who we are. And with my naivety, I thought to myself, I'm not going to stay in Macon anyway.
Well, let me follow up on a couple of points that you made, especially for the benefit of many of our students in the audience who have classes made up almost half of men and women and have lots of support networks of men and women. Maybe some of you have some other stories you'd like to share of what the environment was like at Mercer Law School when you were here. Did it feel like you were isolated? Did you feel like you had a support mechanism when there were very few female professors? None for you, Ms. Chanin. You were it for many of us for a while. Was the law school supportive? Were your classmates supportive of you?
I'll just jump right in. When I graduated in 1980, but when I arrived at law school, I was so excited, having had a really successful career as an undergrad at Mercer, and having been in leadership, having just wonderful grades and great relationships with the faculty as well as the students. So I would say, on a tremendous high, and that is very good, because I went into a tremendous low as I arrived in law school, even though I was part of a class that had the largest number of women. I was the only African American woman, one of 5 African Americans. But out of those African Americans, probably the person that meant the most to me was Virgil Adams, who was my dear friend and my colleague, and we talked. I don't know, I didn't have a great relationship, wasn't negative, but I just didn't get a lot from the other people, the other African Americans. And the students were, I kind of feel like Professor Chanin, and by the way, the only female lawyer I ever got to see is Leah Chanin, and she was my role model. And so when I sort of woke up and had a metamorphosis my second year in law school, I looked at her. The faculty was always great. I don't think, though, they knew what it was like to be a little girl from Macon in this class with no one that I could really identify with. And, the good old South Georgia boys didn't bother me. I'll tell you, the one fellow that bothered me the most was Jay Sekulow. He just happens to represent the president, but he's the person that would speak out of turn, in answering the questions. And then we'd sort of speak in the coffee break area, but I guess I knew then, and I'd take him on back then, so, I don't know what that says, but, I guess I found my voice. And when you come to law school as a woman, say nothing of being the only African-American woman in your class, if you're a woman, you have to find your voice. And once you find your voice, and you are committed to the rule of law, you have courage. You know you've got to be brave, because you got to stand up for yourself and your client. And thirdly, you got to be compassionate. You got to care about your fellow man. If you have those characteristics, you can become a great lawyer and you can do anything that you want to do. But that first year, I had several come to Jesus moments, and it was really very difficult. And I just didn't see, Wendy Shube, I love. When I got to the DA's office in Fulton County, Wendy was there, and she was my good friend, and she'd been to Mercer. I never exactly understood all that, Wendy, but I got it now. But, she was terrific, But thank God for Leah Chanin, and thank you, Mercer, for having her here. For those of us that needed to see what it was like to be a girl and look good every day and wear your high heels and be smart, too.
Yeah.
Okay?
I really did not feel particularly isolated. I have 2 brothers, and my parents were wonderful, and I had no doubt that I could do whatever I wanted to do. Sometimes I perhaps should have devoted more effort to, you know, things that at some level I wanted to do. But no, I mean, you know, I wanted to do well in law school, and it never occurred to me that I wouldn't. And I didn't feel, I didn't, I mean, I didn't, I feel as different as I probably was. So, and by the way, Professor Chanin invited me to her house for dinner, and I still remember it, and I'm still grateful for it, because although it wasn't the male-female thing, it was just being a law student. I mean, which was very different, and only having exams. So you didn't get a chance to, you know, figure out if you were doing it right until it was, you know, you'd either failed them or not.
Judge Buckner, how about you?
My first year of law school, I went to Emory University. And there, it was, you had a lot of African American students, and you had women students, and you had diversity in the student body. You also had a lot of diversity in the faculty, and you had a lot of support. I mean, it was, we formed study groups to study. We ate together, and we had, we knew it was study time. We went to study, but we ate. We had a lot. We supported each other in school. So and I went to school after that year, because my first year was funded by a foundation in New York, and I really didn't have to pay because I passed a course in the summer. But I didn't want to borrow as much money to go to Emory, so Mercer offered me the opportunity to come back to Mercer with this, pay the same amount as the class before me at that level. So I came back to Mercer, and isolated, I mean, it was culture shock when I came to Mercer. I had not, I mean, coming from Emory back to Mercer, it was culture shock. And isolation is the word that I would just really use. It had nothing to do with my family. I'm one of 9 children. My daddy is one of 12. My uncle's one of 13. So, and I lived in a neighborhood where my grandparents lived in the front of the area, and all the rest, everybody on my street were relatives. We were at my grandmother's house every Sunday. So it's not like, we were like a clan. It was not like I didn't have that kind of support. But it was like when you got to the school, you didn't have any support from anybody. Now, and I was at the school at a time where I was never more than 3 women at the school. I was the only woman in my class. There was one ahead of me and one behind me. And so, and even with that, there was no talking, no speaking, and I remember so vividly the first time I came. See, when you get to law school, you got to really want to be here and know who you are so that nothing like that will offend you. See, it didn't offend me because I know what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in law school, and whatever, and I was willing to take whatever came at me. So I remember the first time I sat at a seat, and the young man got up. He just moved. I mean, I just laughed. I mean, it was just funny to me, you know, because of that. And then, but it was really, I had no support from the faculty. And like I say, I know Miss Cheney doesn't remember, Professor Cheney doesn't remember me, but I remember her because she was like a light down here. She was not only just to women students, but to all the students. And she was very helpful in her way, and she did. She was really neat and pretty, but she was really smart. I remember her. She's about the, I'm telling you, she's about the, and I'm saying this respectfully now, we had a great faculty. We had a very renowned faculty, you know, like our faculty members were great, but she's about the only one that I remember really in close terms. And but let me just say, saying all of that, I want to say this. I wouldn't trade the experience. I'm glad that it has changed today because a lot of people cannot take or endure or take the kinds of things that some of us had to take in order to get where we are today. I think that I needed all of that to bring me to reality of the world, to see how people show me differences in people, to show me how what kind of people the world is made of, and also when you start practicing law where you're one of so many lawyers in the community, so there again, you get there, you meet these lawyers. I mean, you've already been there, done that because you did it in law school, you see? So it helped me a whole lot by coming here, but the experience is something not just to, when you first get there and you see it, it's almost unbelievable. Now, I had, it was Judge Brown, who is Superior Court judge down in, I guess he's retired, in Augusta. He was in my class, and Lou Johnson was in my class, and I don't know where Lou is. But see, most of the male students in law school were married, and so usually when they finish, they all going home to the wives, so you can't just have anybody there just to talk to and chit-chat. So you're pretty much on your own. But like I said, I would not trade my experience for anything. So it was very good, and I'm glad I went to law school. And each month, or whenever you all send the periodicals out with to all the alumni, I am so happy to see how much this school has grown. And I am so happy to see how the young female, I see so many females and I see so many African American students. I mean, that does my heart well just to see that because, I mean, it's almost unbelievable. It makes me feel really good to know that Mercer did change and well, we were first to admit, but able to get more students in to get enrolled at the college and at the law school. So I am so happy that it did change. And I'm happy for all the ones that are here today who in the law school. And I hope you continue, and I wish you a lot of success, and I hope you just stay there because it will benefit you in the long run.
Thank you so much. Let me switch gears a little bit and ask you all about your exit from Mercer Law School. As you left and graduated and started seeking employment to practice law, were you able to pursue the jobs that you wanted? Did you encounter roadblocks initially or along the way during your careers for advancement because of your gender or race? Ms. Chanin?
Oh, indeed. I graduated first in my class. I was not the editor of the Law Review. It took me, sometimes I'm a slow person. It took me about 2 years to realize that maybe the reason I wasn't appointed editor in the Law Review was because I was a woman. Maybe it was my personality, maybe it was something else. But it did strike me as strange that for many years that Mercer Law Review editors had been people who were number one or so in the class. As it happened, the person that was named editor was Wally Harrell from Brunswick, a terrific guy, and he's now, I think, retired and on the bench in Brunswick, a terrific person. But I did think that was a little strange after I thought about it. I could not get a job. I could not get a job. The only job possibility I had was the bank thought I might be okay in the trust department for $75 a week. And I said, I don't think I can do that. Anyway, it took me 4 years. I finally did get a job and was very happy at the job. And then, of course, I got to come to the Mercer Law School on the faculty and with the law library, which I loved that. So there weren't any opportunities there for me. And as a woman, you hate to pin that on the fact you're a woman. You always look and say, well, maybe it was me, maybe that. But I don't think I can say that. I think it was because I was a female.
But we are so lucky that you didn't get the job of your dreams and wound up at Mercer Law School because you were there to support all of us. And I remember coming to dinner at your house as well, and I felt like you were my parent here because I was a kid. And I didn't know what on earth I was doing in law school. Everybody was, all the men were married. They were Vietnam vets. I mean, they had families. I was this child, and you had to reprimand me on occasion, and that was fair. But when I left law school, I wanted to move to Colorado to ski. I should have done this before law school, but I didn't. And so I was actually interviewing for a job in a district attorney's office in Steamboat Springs. I flew out and interviewed, and that would have been the job of my dreams. And I got a call saying, well, it was between you and this man instead of this girl. And he had experience, and he's getting the job. So I said, well, I wouldn't have hired me either. But I moved to Denver, and I actually was waitressing. I was a cocktail waitress at Babe's Santa Fe. And then I was a waitress at Sam Wilson's Meat Market. And I started organizing the waitresses who were terribly treated. So I had learned something in law school, and I was organizing the waitresses. I was also a pretty terrible waitress. So I got fired, and I had another job. I finally got hired by the EEOC, and I was very grateful for that. Although on my first day of work, my boss walked into my office and closed the door. This was the EEOC. And he sat down and he said, "You have the most beautiful eyes." And the EEOC. I very much sympathize with Anita Hill. I also had an experience at the EEOC where I went on a business trip with my boss to Chicago. We came back and we took a taxi together. He dropped me at my apartment, and he tried to kiss me on my front doorstep. And I'm like, I don't want to kiss you. And he said it was because he was black. And I said, well, actually, you're married, and you're my boss. So there are a lot of reasons at the EEOC.
I don't think I can top that one. Graduating in the 80s, again, I'm still struggling. Is it the black or is it the woman? But the three women, we were a bit of a radical kind of women in the sense that we were the first Frederick Douglass moot court competition for Balsa. We were the first class of the Frederick Douglass mock trial competition. After us, then people started getting credit for being a part of that competition. I recall I didn't really get any interviews to go to for a job, but I also recall being the justice of Phi Alpha Delta. So I'm thinking those experiences as being the first black in the third, fourth, fifth, et cetera, allowed me to be able to be in environments that just because everybody around you is white, or maybe everybody around you, for the most part, male, you still your own person. You still your own march with your own drummer. And as a result of that, just like listening with Professor Chanin, those who see me or see her or see others can say, well, I can do it too. And you don't even realize you've blazoned a trail until you look back. I tell people, how do you determine if you were successful? You don't determine it in the process of being successful. You determine it by stopping, reflecting, and see how far you've come and who's come with you. So my work experiences, I started with at Central Florida Legal Services in Daytona Beach, Florida, starting a volunteer lawyers project. And we were fortunate to win the Florida Bar's award for the best project. From there, I went to a work for an attorney, a black male in Orlando. And I was the first woman that he ever hired. And when I left him, he said he had had a bad impression of women, particularly in law school, because he thought that the women were trying to impress the professors to try to get the better grades. But he said that after working with me, he said that he could hire another woman. But my secretary there quit because she said she couldn't work for a woman. And from that experience on to working with a small firm, and like you with the EEOC, it happened with the men in the small firm too. They look at the way you walk and they look at the way you do this. And then I had an experience where it was a trial firm, and I was working hard, do the deposition stuff, because I was going to have my first opportunity to examine a witness before a jury. And the partner brought in the white female associate from the other office and had that person to examine the witness after I had done all the work. So in that experience, I came back in my office and I cried because I said, wow. So you can have, he felt like the jury would have a better impression with a white woman than with a black woman attorney. And then from there, I was able to have my own firm, and then I became a shareholder in a large firm. And most of these things I didn't interview, it just happened. I say by God's grace, it just happened. And 18 years as a shareholder, and it just happened. I would have never, by every statistic, but it is what it is. Yeah.
How have you all seen the practice of law change for women? And do you still see roadblocks out there for women?
Well, I think that the practice has certainly changed for the better because there's so many more of us on the scene now. So we've made a lot of progress, but there's still so much more progress that we need to make. What I always like to tell the young women that intern in my class, as well as some of the older women, is you gotta, when you go to law school, and you know, for whatever little difficulties I may have had, my experiences at Mercer prepared me greatly to embark on my career. And I'm really proud of that. And you have to remember that you've got to stay focused on what it is that you offer so that you can offer it to the best of your ability. Today, women have to seek not only to go into the firms, but you need to be the partner. You need to consider being the rainmaker or be the managing partner. You know, when I became the chief judge of the Georgia Court of Appeals, after having been the first African American and only African American woman on the court, I was so ecstatic. I had to do everything, but it was wonderful because I sort of missed being an attorney. I love being a judge, but I sort of missed it. And so it was a tough time in the state, and I worked with Governor Perdue to make certain that the court didn't really take any really bad hits. We had very few furlough days. We didn't get the court was not cut because I said, not on my watch. You know, I had been, in my other life, my ex-husband and I owned a Ford Lincoln Mercury dealership in Jessup, Georgia. And I learned how to sell cars as well as how to practice law. You know, and all you've got is yourself, your integrity and your knowledge. And if you've got a good skill set, I just can't say it enough. There's nothing that you can't do. But why wouldn't a woman want to go to the top? See, that's why I decided not to initially to go into a firm, because I didn't know how far I would get or how long it would last. You know, I made those decisions early on after I found my voice at Mercer to go into and become a law clerk. I worked for one of the first African American judges who had been a state legislator who was a trial judge in Fulton County. It just so happened, coincidentally, that he had been a classmate of my mother and father's, which I didn't even know. But anyway, I found that out later. But he had never hired an African American woman to clerk for him before, and he hired me. He was a trailblazer. You know, I guess as I look back over my life, I have to accept that I've been a trailblazer. But I just say to myself, if not me, who? And why not me? And so since it is me, why wouldn't I want to do the very best that I can do? But I think that women need to accept the fact that they can not only pursue a legal career, they can go to the top. But you've got to be willing to give something back. You can't ask for a man's seat and think you're going to do less. And you shouldn't want it that way. You should want to be the best. And I believe if you subscribe to that you can go to the top.
I want to comment on Yvette's statement. Why don't women go for the top? Here's my view of why they don't, Yvette. Many women want to have a family life. And if you pick the wrong husband, you are doomed. If I had any advice to give to women who, if they would ask me about what's the most important thing you can do in order to have a successful, let's just for temporarily say successful means climbing up, becoming a partner, managing, whatever. I would say the most important decision you can make is who you marry, if you decide to marry.
That's true.
Now, I don't want you to think that I have a bitter opinion about this because I had a terrible husband. Not true. I was married for 40 years and I had 4 kids. But it is very difficult. I have seen it over and over. When you do not have a supportive husband or wife, if you're inclined that way, if you don't have a supportive spouse, you're in trouble. Because you need someone to understand that you're not going to walk in the door at 5 o'clock every day, and that you can't be responsible for the whole family. And also, the advice that I used to give a lot of people who ask me is, if you need some help, you've got to have help. Men do not operate in a law firm without help, whether it's clerks or secretaries or whatever. So you cannot, if you're responsible for running a home, you cannot do it and practice law and be successful too. Because as Yvette says, you've got to work. And most women do work. They're interested, but if you don't have a supportive husband, you're in trouble.
And let me just say, my professor always makes the right point at the right time. And so I stand corrected. But let me say this, having been such a trailblazer, thank goodness I got married to a wonderful person, but then I decided I needed to be divorced. Okay, everybody doesn't need to be divorced. I'm the product of 2 people who lived together and were married for 40 years, and then my father passed, and my mother's still with me. Marriage is a wonderful institution. You've got to marry the right man. But what I want to say to the young ladies, if you want to be at the top, then you can do that. If you want to get married and have a family, you can do that. When I was starting out, I'm not so certain we had those choices. Back when you and I were working for Mr. Slayton in Dad's office, I got married, as a young lawyer back then. But, I wasn't thinking about having a baby at that time. But if I had been thinking about it, he was not going to let me try those cases.
I was having a baby in that office. He sent me to juvenile court.
I remember. So we've paid those dues so that the young women today can have the baby. And guess what? They've got a thing called maternity leave. See, back when I was working as a young woman, we didn't have that. And so since I really wanted to test out my skills and learn and grow, I made some sacrifices. That's another part of being a trailblazer. we've got to make these choices. But, if you want to have a family, I think you need to go do that. If you want to practice law and be a trailblazer, then why not do the very best that you can do?
And could I, one comment on that, because I took a different route. I've never been married. And I,
I have been.
and,
I'm clapping.
and I don't have any children, godchildren, nieces, nephews, etc. And in reflection, my life probably would have been completely different if I had had to make those sacrifices. But the good thing is now I have a firm with women in it, and we have a lot of flexible, because I recognize that you have to have that flexibility with families.
I do think that things have changed a lot. And one of the ways that I know this is true, my son was probably maybe 3 years old, and I was practicing law, and I was, having to travel some, and he was staying with my mother, and he was negotiating his bedtime with her. Now, by the way, I agree with everything Professor Trainin said. I was married, but badly, and so my ex-husband, my children's father, was a doctor. And so, but Miller was negotiating about bedtime, and my mother said, "Oh, Miller, you are a great negotiator. You will make a great lawyer." And he said, "Oh, no, Yadi, girls are lawyers, boys are doctors." And so the worldview had changed by the time my son was coming along.
Well,
And
wouldn't you
can I
all,
just-
all agree that one of the biggest changes for women in law is that none of us could wear what we are wearing tonight on this stage when we got out of law school, right? We had to wear blue, black, or gray little mini man suits with hideous ties, silk ties. No pants. I mean, we were barely inching into pantsuits when I got out. But you could never, one law firm in Atlanta had a rule that you could not wear red. And so I always did wear red when I took depositions with them. But because I knew their rule. But Ms. Chanin, you could never get away with a beautiful suit like that in a law firm when we got out of law school. I mean, you dress like little mini men in an awful way. Judge Shue.
But I did want to just say that I have a very supportive husband. I'm sure that I could not have accomplished what I did without him, but he was also a very busy lawyer, and I had a lot of help. But I think that I've just noticed over the years that a lot of really talented women lawyers have dropped out of the law because they had children, and I think a lot of lawyers are type A's. Certainly a lot of women lawyers are type A, and they couldn't stand to be less than perfect as a lawyer and as a mother, and that wasn't my problem. But I think that if you feel like you can't sort of take less than perfection from yourself, that if your expectations are so high, then you actually can't do both. And those are the women who stop. And my biggest concern is that I think women always need to be in a position to be able to support themselves. I was a divorce lawyer for a time. I've served in family court. I'm doing mediation, including divorce mediation, and I mediated a very contentious divorce yesterday, and the woman had been a lawyer. She had quit 15 years ago her children were young, and with her husband's agreement, she was going to raise the children. And well, now they're getting divorced. He doesn't want to pay her a penny of alimony. He's making a fortune, so she can get a property division, but alimony is not big. And if somebody's a lawyer or has an ability to earn, she's not going to get a lot of alimony. And she's looking at her life changing dramatically. And so I just hate seeing women drop out. I mean, when you have a career and a profession, even if you can just dial it back and do less, part-time, go with the government or a company or something that accommodates being a mother, and then you can do it all, but maybe not all at the same time. And so I just hate seeing smart, talented women leave the profession. It's really hard to go back 10 years later. It's hard.
By the way, since I've got the stage, I want to announce to Dean Cox that Mercer still owes me maternity leave. Yes, indeed. I had my 4th child while I was on the faculty at Mercer Law School, and on the 8th day after she was born, I came back to work, and I never had any maternity leave.
Wow, wow. Well, let's wrap up tonight. Let's wrap up with one last question for our panel. What advice would you give our current students, male and female, or our recent graduates, using your years of experience, the changes you've seen in life? Offer some words of wisdom to our students and young lawyers.
Well, I do workers' compensation. So my advice to the young lawyers is read the code. Read the expletive deleted code. And don't come and ask me a question unless you have. And I think really you can broaden that. You can, when you're working, own your work. Read the files. Know them. Know everything that's in it. I think that that's one of the biggest problems that some young lawyers, they'll come to me and say, well, was surveillance done? And I'm going, have you read the file? So read the file and just do what you do with a glad heart.
I would simply say, don't lose sight of the big picture. Take a look at the big picture and also take care of yourself. Be good to your family and your friends. Have a life. Don't just practice law. Have a life. And have some fun. Thank you.
I would just say all of what you've heard up here in terms of the stumbling blocks that we have all faced and some of the things that we've gone through, just be prepared to know that when you get out in life, you're going to still have your stumbling blocks. But be committed to who you are, what you want to do, and know that you can overcome those things. And again, and with that, again, do something, have a life. Because you can always solve these problems. You just got to hang in there, have a willingness to hang in there, and everything, it's not going to be like you want it, but it's going to be all right. Right?
I would say that, whatever your job is, it's really important to get involved in your community. Lawyers have always been the leaders of the community, and you want to find time to contribute in some area that is significant and important to you. I think it's also how you get known in the community, and everybody wants a lawyer that their friends have heard of, and that's how you get known. I would also say that you need to make friends. You need to make friends in law school. You need to make friends in your legal community, because friends will support you and comfort you when things go wrong, and they will help you find your next job when you need that. You want to do favors when you can. As a lawyer, some people are real sticklers for rules, and we have rules for a reason, but people make mistakes. They miss deadlines, things happen. And it's just good to do a favor when you can, because these things will come back around to you. You can keep your sense of humor, you can be kind, and you can still be an advocate for your client?
You know, when I graduated from law school and I sent out the little invitations and the little cards, my motto on each of the cards was, "That you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." And that has been my motto throughout my life. And I knew that I was loved. I mean, like I said, we didn't have a whole lot of money and stuff like that, but I knew that I was loved. So I was willing to take risks because I knew that if I took a risk, I could always go home. And so there is nothing wrong with making a mistake. What's wrong is not learning from that mistake. And law is not just a job. Law is a profession, and it upsets me because we've lost the professionalism. And I was thinking, I said, I noticed that a lot of men, particularly in large firms, et cetera, they watch each other's back, but I notice a lot of women, we stab each other's back. And we have to learn that we're in this together. It's not a job, it's a profession. And if we bless with carrying this profession, then we have an obligation to do our best to make sure the profession is kept so that those coming behind us could have that experience too. And so if I said anything, don't give up. It's okay to make a mistake. You're a professional. You're not just a job placer. And we just got to watch and keep each other's back.
Well, we have one other special occasion that we want to celebrate tonight, and that is the birthday next week of Professor Leah Chanin. May I share your age? Next week, Ms. Chanin will be 90 years young. So, we will have a little special treat coming out here on the stage. And we're going to, as we wrap up in just a moment, we're going to invite you all, if you want to stay, to join us for a little birthday cake. But I'm going to turn the program back over to our MC, Maya Middleton.
Please join me in giving our esteemed panelists a big Mercer Law round of applause. And as a special thank you, we have prepared a few gifts that we're going to be handing out, and we'll be joining by Chelsea Henderson and Mallory Fleming. So to conclude, once again, we would like to thank all of you all for joining us tonight. You're welcome to come up here and join us as we share some cake, or you may make your way home safely. So here's to the trailblazers who opened the door for all of us during the past 100 years, and here's to a new century of even greater leadership and equality for the women of Mercer Law School. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and have a great night.